I'm going to offer you each this magic device. And when you have the magic device, you have the opportunity to speak a little bit for about 4 or 5 minutes and share with us your background and some of the work that you do. So, Toby, I'm going to hand it to you to start. Thank you.
Very good. Hello, everyone. And a big thank you to Miriam, Phi, Future Storytelling for inviting us. And great to be on in such esteemed company. So I'm from the National Theatre in London. It's been described as the busiest producing theatre in the world. We are a theatre-making factory, so everything that we make is developed on site. We've got 3 different theatres. This is the paint frame, so it's a kind of like 7-story paint frame. So we do about 24 productions a year. We place at 93% houses. We have a live-to-broadcast cinema initiative. So we've got a huge digital audience around the world, which is really, really important to us. And in 2016, we set up what is called the Immersive Storytelling Studio. It's a space for us to bring artists in, storytellers, and to see what these new immersive technologies mean for the craft of storytelling. And Rufus, who is our relatively new artistic director, he came in 2015 to 16, and was actually reading Creativity Inc. at the time, which is the story of Pixar. And he, his kind of philosophy is that, there's great technology that it comes into its own when you bring in the storytellers, and that's very much kind of the push behind our studio. I'm just going to talk very quickly about our first project and our most recent project, just to kind of give you a sense of the work that we do. In 2016, we had a show called Wonder.Land, which was Damon Albarn, Moira Buffini and Rufus Norris's musical adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, where Alice is actually an avatar of a girl in high school. And the rabbit hole is the internet, and Wonder.Land is this virtual space that people go to. So it's actually a kind of dream brief for like our first VR project. So we created the VR world to look like the world that had been designed for the stage show. We created a really short kind of 4.5-minute music video experience where you fall down the rabbit hole and you get to experience Wonderland. And this is Che, the Cheshire Cat. And in the show, Ali is getting bullied at school, and she goes into Wonderland on her phone, but she goes into the toilets to hide, and that's where she goes into Wonderland. And so we created an installation front of house at the National where we recreated the school toilets. So you went into Wonderland in the same context that she did, i.e. you sat on the toilet. Which I hope to think is the first documented case of VR on the toilet. And we had, what was incredible was we had also people who are used to queuing up for the toilet, so the fact they had to queue up for the VR was kind of like match made in heaven. Did you use the toilet? No, we were very firmly glued the loose seats down just to make sure no one got... In over 5 months, we had 90,000 people do the VR, which was just incredible. If we'd have been really impressed with 10 or 20,000. More people saw the VR than saw the actual live show, which is slightly bonkers. I mean, it's a 4.5-minute experience versus a 2-hour show, so it's not like for like. But actually, in terms of test to audience, which is what all this stuff is for us, it was really interesting. Has anybody heard of the National Film Board of Canada? So this is our most recent project, and we're extremely proud of it and extremely proud of the relationship that we've got with the NFB, who I had admired for a long time and had kind of no other reason to pick up the phone and say, I think you guys are kind of cool, we're kind of cool, maybe we should do something together kind of thing. But this project just kind of came out of a meeting, which is great. So Jordan Tanner-Hill is a Canadian theatre writer-director, and this piece came out of a lab that we did with 3 other artists, and basically we kind of incubated everybody for a week in Toronto, had a 6-week break, and then came back and made prototypes in London for each of the artists. And Jordan's mother is unfortunately terminally ill with cancer, and he wanted to use this as an opportunity to make a memoir piece. And so what happens is, in the experience, you play Jordan. So you take on Jordan as the role of Jordan as a 5-year-old boy, and you take your shoes off. It's a room scale experience. You take your shoes off and put the headset on, at which point the world starts to be illustrated around you. Jordan narrates, and he invites you. You're stood at the front door, and then he invites you to go in. And when you reach out, you can see your own hand. You can see an illustrated door handle, and there is actually a door handle there. And you open the door and go into the living room, which you then start to walk around. And the mum exists in the space because we've got an actress with a live motion capture suit on. So if the actress does this, then mum does this in the headset. And the eyes are the only thing that are kind of digitally mediated, really. There's some soundscape in there as well, but everything else is tactile. And she does what any mum would do with a 5-year-old son, is she comes in and gives you a hug. And that's what I call the holy shit moment, because that's what you see in people's body language, is they just respond to it because they're like, oh my God, I get this. It's like living in an animation. So there's mum. This is the hug. This was when we premiered it at Tribeca. This is actually in development. There's a bit when you've done the hug and then mum says, oh God, Jordan, your feet stink, go and open the window. And you turn around and there's a window to open and the soundscape changes and fresh air comes in. We did have an occurrence of somebody think that we'd kind of ad-libbed and that they actually did have smelly feet, but we're like, no, it was part of the script, it's fine. And then you go to bed at the end of the day. Mum tucks you into bed. And this is like one of my favourite photographs of all time, because it's just insane. But he is so happy to be getting tucked into bed by this illustrated mum. I'll play the trailer.
You were already at the front door when I arrived, like a little dog barking, telling me about your day. Lost in your own world. I wanted to save you from all the suffering. Looking at you, I thought, why can't it always be this?
Premiered the first chapter at Tribeca, then we premiered the first and second chapters at Venice Film Festival, and we're just about to go into development of the full thing now, which will be about 20-25 minute experience. I'm going to hand over to you.
Wow, beautiful. But it confirms my sense that what people want from VR is their mother. And from computers in general.
Or a mother.
Maybe it's better, yes, the mother they think they deserve. Exactly. So that suggests a whole other lot. There's $1 million idea for you. So I'm Janet Murray, and I spent most of my career at MIT, and now I'm at Georgia Tech for almost as long. And I've been in these world-class toy shops making things out of computation in order to realize my sense that this is a narrative form and that it can tell more expressive stories than we could tell with previous narrative forms. Not that it will displace them, but that it is a new palette of affordances. And here I am enjoying a HoloLens robot game where they come out of the wall at you. So I have a lab at Georgia Tech, and there are videos of the projects that my students make because I want each semester's work to be part of a continuing community of practice. And when I came in '99, the thing I most wanted to do was multi-threaded storytelling using long-form television as the basis. In my book, Hamlet on the Holodeck, in the first edition, which was in '97, there's a new edition updated out this year. I predicted that long-form television would be one of the results of moving into digital delivery. And we've seen that happen, and people are just more consistent about what they tell. But what hasn't happened is that people are allowed to navigate, so you only get the story that you want, that you're interested in. You don't get the other characters. So there's another $1 million idea that somebody else can develop. One of the advantages of being in academics is that you don't have to make money out of any of these ideas. So we built a community of practice around that, and then Oculus gave us a lot of machines, which we were grateful for, about 2 years ago. And since then, I've had 4 semesters of students working on projects in VR. And I guess the other book that's there is about I teach, and I came to Georgia Tech from MIT because it had a graduate program in digital media, and we then founded a PhD program. And my part of it has been teaching this core course on the principles of design for anything made out of bits. So what my primary interest is the development of the conventions that will take us from the equivalent of the arrival of the Ciotat train into I usually use Effie Briest as my reference point, because there is a moment where a train arrives and you can see that the language of film has supported much more expressive storytelling. What are those conventions? That's what's obsessed me. And so it's a design focus. And so I wanted to show you briefly all of these projects are on the website, which is etv.tech.edu projects, and you can watch, you can sort them by those categories and look at them if you're interested. I always say I've been doing this for so long, I've made every possible mistake, so people can learn from that. And I should also just, one other thing before I show you these 2 very brief clips, is the T2B is A Tale of Two Boyfriends, which is my protest against an offer of an alternative to the hero story as the go-to in, especially in computational approaches to storytelling. So you might want to look at that.
What an honor to meet you, wizard. I'm here to warn you about strange things that have been happening at Georgia Tech. Students are being petrified, and I suspect Lord Voldemort is behind it. You are in danger, and the school is in danger. I managed to open the portal for some time. Hurry, before the Death Eaters find out, and it closes again.
She begins to follow the direct.
Okay, so then she follow. So we did this before Pokemon at the end. So you walk around the area of Georgia Tech, and it leads you to the MARTA station, the subway. Can you play the second video?
The secret visiting world.
And then, lo and behold, when you get to the station, you can see the portal, and then our canonical trolley becomes the railroad car into Hogwarts. So that was one project, and you can see one thing one learns from that is that it'd be better to fit what you're looking at to the frame, the visual frame. But definitely, it left me with a sense of one of the big possibilities for storytelling here is the appearance of the magical in the familiar world. And if the AR interfaces were easier to work with, my students would have made a lot of things with fairies, but I have hopes we'll do that. I'll show you one other. This was a more recent one that I was very happy about because they built on the VR. So this is the third semester that we were doing VR, and the semester before. Can you show the third one, please? This is the last one.
Trespass is a stealth game designed for the HTC Vive and other room-scale VR devices. Using the impossible space allowed us to maximize the physical room in which the player moves by shifting the virtual space around them. This shift is hidden from the player, creating the illusion of a large, consistent virtual space. Making a stealth game in VR using an impossible space challenged us to find features of current stealth games we could translate to VR while figuring out which features presented liabilities.
Okay. So, and it turns out that moving through something that you crouch down at is really good because then you distract people because they look at the floor and then you can switch the room around. And so that one was very gratifying to me because the semester before we'd made a different game that used this impossible space technology that they invented at ICT in LA. And these students built on it. So this is my project. You can see more about them at those links. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi. I'm Jamie Pallot. I'm a co-founder of Emblematic Group. It's a company based in LA that we make what we call immersive journalism. Essentially, we recreate actual events and situations from the past and place you inside them so you can experience them as though you're really there rather than just witnessing them on a 2D screen. The company was founded by someone called Noni de la Peña, who... thank you. All right. Okay. And to continue the motherhood theme, she's widely known as the godmother of VR. So... just don't call her the grandmother of VR. She doesn't respond so well to that one. But Noni's been making walk-around VR since 2009, which, for those of you who know anything about it, know how incredibly early that was. We've been Emblematic Group for about 4 years, and I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the range of material that we tend to make. We have 4 pieces here. The first one's called We Who Remain. It was actually a 360 video with 6 branching narratives of 6 different characters involved in the civil conflict in southern Sudan. We made that for the New York Times. We made quite a few pieces for the Times. They've been a great supporter and champion of what we do. The second one is called Across the Line, and this is a piece we made of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. They came to us, having seen some of our work at Sundance, and they wanted an experience that would bring home to people what it's like to actually access a Planned Parenthood healthcare clinic in most parts of America when you have to literally kind of fight your way through a gauntlet of really angry people waving placards and yelling really obscene things in your face. So we literally recreated that gauntlet using, as you can see, pretty primitive avatar characters, but all the audio that you hear being shouted at you was captured on real sites across clinics across the country. So that was, and Planned Parenthood still uses this piece. They tour it around to build support for what they do. We have also been very nicely treated by the Knight Foundation. They gave us a grant in partnership with PBS Frontline, which, as you know, is pretty much America's leading documentary TV producer. And the goal of the grant was to make 3 VR documentaries to see what you can achieve in the genre of documentary specifically using volumetric VR, and also to test the results. We've had some very interesting results back from that. So it was to make 3 pieces. The still you see here is from something called After Solitary, which is about a guy called Kenny Moore, who spent 30-plus years in the Maine state prison, more than 3 of them in the solitary confinement cell. And what we did there was I'll get into this a little more detail on the next slide, capture his cell in complete geometric precision, and then load him in there as a hologram and have him tell you his own story from within the cell. It's one of our biggest pieces to date, I would say. We also have to pay the bills, so we do some commercial work for Cartier. We did a recreation of the inside of their flagship store when they reopened on Fifth Avenue in New York a couple of years ago. So immersive journalism is what we do. As I pointed out in that Planned Parenthood piece, we used to be limited to very simple, kind of primitive computer graphics. And we occasionally got the criticism that, how can you tell these like life and death stories of people getting beaten to death by the US border guard, or of explosions going off in Aleppo in Syria, when you're showing them in these quote-unquote cartoony characters. So one of the things that's changed for us a lot over the last year and a half is the advent of new methods of data capture, both of capturing actual locations and of capturing people, the characters inside those locations. So for locations, we have very much embraced this new-ish medium called photogrammetry. It's essentially, you take an SLR camera, you take I think the technical term is a shitload of pictures of the space that you're trying to recreate. Sorry, pardon my French. Pardon mon français. And then there's an algorithm that stitches those images together to create a space that is geometrically maps one-to-one to the actual space. But the photo resolution is also staggering. So you can get up, this close to any piece of that room. Here's the cell that we captured, and you see the fine grain of detail. It's a very, very powerful way of recreating a location, a space. Thus, locations. When it comes to people, I'd say we're among the very most early users of what we call volumetric video capture, also called videogrammetry sometimes. There's very few people doing this. We partner with a company in Los Angeles called 8i. Essentially, it's 50-plus cameras in a kind of very high-tech green screen in the round. The amounts of data that get captured per second are enormous. It's a whole part of the fun. But what you end up with is a hologram. So a human figure that looks somewhat video real, but that has volume and depth. And what we then do is we take those holograms and we drop them into the environment. And then, you are in the place where the story happened, and the story is told to you by the character. We took a little creative license. I know we're on a panel about, the ethics of. Anyway, we took some creative license. For example, one of the stories Kenny tells. What he used to do in that cell is horrific. He pulled all the hair out of his body on more than one occasion. He would cut himself, and with the blood, write lyrics from his favorite songs on the wall. So we kind of animate some of those sequences to bring that to life. This is the only kind of philosophical point I'm going to try to make. One of the most overused words in the early days of VR, two, presence and empathy, right? VR is amazing because it creates presence, makes you feel like you're really there, and feeling like you're there generates empathy, so you have stronger feelings towards the characters that you encounter. I don't say it anymore because it's become such a cliche of the medium, but it's true. We don't have it here to play for you, but if you ever get the chance to experience After Solitary, it is... it makes the hairs on your neck stand up to hear Kenny tell you his story in the space where he actually was. But I think part of our evolution has been that we've discovered a whole other realm in which VR is, I think, uniquely powerful. So it's not just emotional connection; it's also an incredibly efficient way of delivering a lot of information. That may sound like a cold term, efficiency, but we kind of have become aware of a certain kind of story. We call them spatial narratives. Think of any event where the physical dimensions of what happened or where whatever went down are crucial to understanding what it was really about, right? A police shooting of a guy who was his car door was halfway open. Nothing can recreate the sense of actually being placed there and, it was like 5 paces away and there was a really bright light here, so maybe it was hard to see what's going on. There's a certain kind of story that you can tell in VR that you cannot tell in any other medium. Greenland, melting Arctic ice cap, we take you under the ocean to have it explained to you why the ocean is melting as fast as it is. Can we run the video, please?
It turns out that this fjord is around 1,000 feet deep, meaning that most of the glacier is underwater. And here, the deeper water is warmer. The NASA research shows that warm, salty currents from the Atlantic are eating away at the glacier from below. And this appears to be happening to glaciers all around Greenland.
I'm done. That's it. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you can tell, we have an incredibly talented panel of people who are making beautiful things or encouraging students to make beautiful things using these new technologies. And so it falls on me to be the kind of naysayer here and play the other side of this. So I'm now going to try to poke holes in all of your tech optimism, and which, by the way, is not how I really feel. But anyway, so for the sake of an interesting panel, why don't we start with this one? I mean, these technologies have been VR, for example. I mean, no one has done any really serious studies on the effect on, say, a young brain. We're just in the early stages of this. Is this going to destroy our youth if they're spending hours and hours in here? Haven't there been rules placed to prevent kids under 13 from using VR?
All the influences in society, and you think VR is going to be the thing that corrupts your children?
Okay. See how this goes. I'm not that
I think it's a really good point, though.
Right.
In terms of the children thing, there is obviously research that needs to be done. I mean, I think, we had it when we showed Wonderland. We were like, the headset advisors say that you shouldn't have children in under 13 years old. Now, for me, that's for long-term exposure rather than just for a one-off 4-minute. And actually, most parents got that, and they said it was fine. Most parents knew that the kids weren't going to let them get away with not sitting on the toilet and doing the VR. There was like an interesting dialogue there. But I think the thing is, when you get to a point with technology when we actually kind of rationalize things because of their benefit. Like, I still remember, and I still don't know the answer to the question, when mobile phones came out, everyone thought we were going to have massive tumours on one side of our head because of all the,
What did you say?
But that conversation went out the door after a period of time when everyone realised how great mobile phones were, and actually maybe we don't want to know the answer to that kind of thing. It never felt like that research came back in the room in the same way that it was set up for. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing, and I'm not saying that's what we should do around VR, but there's, I think we need to get ourselves in a kind of environment where we have healthy conversations around the future of the tech and engagement with it, rather than skeptical ones or naive ones. And
you're calling me a skeptic? Sorry.
And that's why, kind of from an academic point of view, kind of having all the correct disciplines feeding into the conversation is the right thing to do. But the fact that we are actually talking about ethics is a really good sign, because it's just another sign for me that this is a whole new medium that's coming into land. And actually people are like, okay, we got excited, now let's get grown up about this and find out how to work with it properly, which is a good sign, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think about how people are suggesting now that it's the violent video games that are creating the school shootings. Think about how much more powerful the experience will be in virtual reality if there are all these murdering games happening in VR. Are you at all worried about this? Janet?
Yeah, actually, that's one that I think is not, that we shouldn't trivialize. I think that there's plenty of evidence that video games do not cause violence, and I think there's plenty of evidence that gun ownership in the United States does cause violence. So, but I think that we do. But I'm not satisfied with just that response. I think that cultural narratives can further oppression and can further destructive behaviors. That I've reached a point where I will not watch, say, The Handmaid's Tale, because I don't want to see women's victimization at the center of a narrative anymore. And so I think. whereas Wonder Woman, I'm there. So I know that it changed my behavior toward dogs, which I am a little germ-phobic of, which I blame on my mother, actually. But when I started petting a dog in VR, on a screen, just on a screen, and then a colleague of mine brought a dog into a meeting, and I found myself petting this dog, and I thought, where did I learn this behavior? I think it does make a difference when you enact something. I think we know that it cures certain forms of trauma to people. So I don't think you can argue that it has this healthy reaction and then argue that it doesn't have a destructive effect as well.
I mean, the thing that makes it powerful is also the thing that makes it potentially dangerous, right? It taps into your neurological circuits in a way that no other medium has done.
See, that I don't believe for
Really?
a minute. Not for a minute, no. I think that, I'm sorry.
So you're agreeing? No, it's fine. Handmaid's Tale
sorry.
Canadian, by the way. Just a big...
What?
No, Margaret Atwood, Canadian. That's okay, no.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, oh, I forgot. Oh, I'm so sorry. Listen, I really do want to defect to Canada, so I hope that doesn't destroy my application. No, and she's wonderful, but yeah, no. But
So why do you disagree so much?
yeah.
I mean,
Why do you think it's neurological? Why do you think?
well, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been some pretty serious academic neuroscientific studies that have shown that it taps into your cortex in a way.
I think that I'm not a neuroscientist. I can't evaluate them, but I noticed that it's the philosophers who were upset about it, and they. It's not really neuroscientists who are raising this concern. And I think that everything we do changes our brain, and we have such a gross picture of the brain right now that if you took a picture of my brain while I was reading a novel, or if you took a picture of my brain, on
drugs?
Well, I get, I'm not that good with drugs. I mean, I don't, I'm a poor subject.
Sorry.
I've lived a boring life. I can barely drink. So, but yes, I think that alcohol, for instance, is much more toxic than VR. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
So no driving on VR.
Yeah.
That's a proper slogan there.
Don't drive while drunk and in VR. Definitely. I would actually, in terms of the kids thing, though, I would repeat an anecdote of Nonny's, not of mine. Nonny has, part of the reason she does what she does, starting what she did, she has 2 teenage kids, when she started, they were like young teens. She has a house in Mar Vista in LA with an office in the garage, and there was this scene one time, her daughter was sat in the living room playing Minecraft, and the door to the living room opened, and the son walked in, and the daughter looked up and said, "Why did you leave?" Because he'd been playing Minecraft in the garage with her, but he'd left the game and entered the room physically, but to her, you left me, right? So she was like, that was the epiphany, like, wow, this is how these kids experience the world, right? They are locked into these massive shared virtual worlds, right? Which Microsoft has bought Minecraft because it's a fantastically educational experience that teaches kids, the values of civics and problem solving and da. So, the horse has left the stable, I think, in terms of what, right?
Well, so touching on the game thing.
The Chevalet Party, that's all I really wanted to say, yeah.
Another thing that I'm very concerned about is the whole possibility of different types of bullying and bias that can come in through different technologies. I mean, I was just recently out at Microsoft and talking to a bunch of people who are involved in gaming there, and shocked to just see the numbers and understand how profound misogyny, bullying, racism, there's a very dark side to that gaming community. that seems to have free license because there's a certain level of anonymity. And I just worry that if that same stuff can happen, if we can have cyberbullying, how much more terrible is that going to be when it's experiential, when we're immersed in it, when we're living it?
All the more reason, therefore, to start to fight back against it in every way that we can as this medium emerges, I would say. I mean, you know, like it or not, we're going to enter the metaverse more or less at some point. I mean, all the technology is going in. No?
No, I'm curious that you believe it. Yeah, you think.
We didn't rehearse this, by the way.
Yeah.
No, but we are, right?
Yeah.
Some kind of virtual alternative world that we, quote unquote, jack into, it's coming. I mean, we're a quarter of the way there already. So we better learn how to start policing it and fighting back against the negative forces within it. I think, for me, the bigger ethical issue is who owns that metaverse, right? Is it going to be a huge corporation that owns the rights to the simulacrum of the Earth that we all inhabit, or is there going to be some movement and some space for individuals to push back? Open source versus.
I mean, I'd say all the points that you talked about there in terms, they're problems with society, not problems with technology. And why do we, it's kind of like, for me, VR is a form of technology. Fire is a very early kind of form of technology. It's up to the human whether they decide to keep their own family warm or burn the neighbour's house down. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, those are the things that we shouldn't like put a whole new technology in view it through the eyes of evil, because the human condition has the potential to be evil. It is more about how we, as you say, police it, or kind of. I mean, I kind of think anyway. Our generation are quite the more problematic generations in a way. I do really have a lot of faith for the under 10s, under 20s in terms of they seem to be having a much different take on what society means and what humanity means, and hopefully, I mean, maybe it's not coincidence that this technology is back around at that time when there is a different group of people who are actually going to be the people that make the future. We're probably going to sort loads of hard problems out along the way, but then they'll have a proper medium to be able to express themselves with properly, and hopefully in a more positive than a more negative way. One of the things somebody said this morning actually about people making their own VR as well as consuming it, that is really interesting. I think, when you look at, what a 10-year-old kid might do in terms of being able to develop their own VR, I think that's kind of really compelling. And whether that's for storytelling or whether it's for kind of a cathartic use or social use or whatever.
So I love your. Oh, sorry.
Well, there's so many misconceptions. One of the ones that's interesting to me is that totalizing one, that because we have something that can give us a visual sense of being in a 3D space that's not the space we're in, that we're going to be jacked into the metaverse, or that we are. That it's going to be possible to totally control our behavior from there, or that because we can make an animated figure in that world, that we could believe in almost if we don't try to do something that the designers haven't thought of yet, that we'll be able to have AIs there that will be totally indistinguishable from human actors. So I think that there's enormous gulf between what we can do and what people think we can do, and that sometimes it appears as hype when people say, in a very trivializing way, you put it on and it's an empathy machine, and all of a sudden Jamie Dimon, who's this banker and at Davos, is
weeping
Jesus
child.
Christ. Yeah, right. You know, like, exactly. Right. That's all we need. If we only had the right helmet, you know, like, I mean, just think.
Yeah.
But, you know, so, and I think it has to do with the novelty. That the machine, that this is a very, and it has to do with that myth, which of course didn't actually happen that way, of people fleeing the room from the Ciotat train. But even though it didn't happen, it's a story, captures the truth. We tell that story because people were freaked out that we have the power to fool the senses in this new way. So I think people are freaked out and enraptured by that, and they'll get over it.
Yeah,
Because that you can't really, you can't.
Yeah, I disagree. Surprisingly.
Good.
No, I mean, you know, I spent the first 30 years of my life doing nothing but literature, right?
Yeah.
PhD, professor. I mean,
Me
to
too.
me, still, writing is actually the most persuasive and immersive medium that exists. You can completely lose yourself. It's not passive at all. You have to make a mental bridge to the author. I think that VR it's an evolution of media. It's, you know, some people say it's more technologically dependent than any other, but every medium that we've developed has been dependent on technology to some extent. Printing press, oil pigments, right? I mean, we just happen to have reached a stage where technology is so ever present and we're so dependent on it. I still have the clicker. I agree there is a novelty element, but there is also a very real power to move and to astonish and to deliver an emotional charge. I still get emotionally blown away by things like Draw Me Close, and I've been looking at VR for 5-6 years, ever since Nonnie showed me her first piece at USC like 6 years ago. I also think, you know, it's not going to replace other forms of media, but there are certain kinds of stories that you can tell that you just can't tell in any other medium. And to me, it does come back down to these sort of the spatial narratives, right? Putting you in the actual dimensions. I mean, nothing can compete with that, right? In a way, sometimes, and this sounds like trivializing it, I've always been a huge fan of data visualizations, right? So, for example, like 6-7 years ago, the New York Times Afghan correspondent David Rhodey was captured by the Taliban, and he escaped after a long time, after like 18 months in captivity. And the Times serialized the story over the course of a week, his escape story. Amazing story. Like, he couldn't wait to get the paper every morning to like read the next chapter. And the final day, they had a beautiful diagram of the compound and all the steps he had to take and like the amount of time he had to get from one end to the other and where the rope ladder would be hung only for 5 minutes. And like suddenly you see the whole thing there encapsulated. And what VR can do is put you there.
So I just want to add, I mean, I think that we shouldn't limit this to just VR. And I do think we would all agree that once you start mixing multiple senses, when you have touch and smell and taste and as well as visuals, that has to be a more powerful form of storytelling. I mean, or impactful.
Good luck doing it. I mean, you know, I think that I'm thrilled to see this new generation of practitioners exploring all of these different dimensions. But I think it's very hard to imagine taste and smell being...
At big scale.
Yeah.
It's coming.
And touch, too, unless you have that actor there to hug you.
Yeah.
And I was in a VR experience where someone did prod me like that. To me, that's cheating, you know, in some ways. That it's a wonderful theatrical, you know. I mean, it sounds like a thrilling experience, but it's a very particular installation. It's a different genre than mass media VR that we're all going to jack into, or you know.
So let's go back to the ethics. I mean, Toby, I totally agree with your point. These are all just tools. And the way they're used depends on the person using them, whether they're used for good or for bad. But here we have these potentials. I mean, I think about how bad my nightmares were when I saw Frankenstein on television as a little kid. I don't even go to horror films anymore. But imagine what the power you have as a storyteller now, putting somebody in a total immersive experience,
to just a horror experience. I mean, you could create serious psychological damage. I've heard other people talk about VR being and other immersive technologies being used to actually create torture. Mm-hmm. And this comes back to one of the early pieces that Nani did, where she was simulating what it was like to sort of be a captured person. If we have the potential to push this, I mean, they use loud music as a form of torture. Imagine being in a 24/7 terrorizing thing.
Shut your eyes.
It is actually a little trick. I do too.
If it ever happens.
Can't shut your ears.
That's harder.
That is harder.
Yeah, it'd be worse to have the music.
I guess where I'm going with this is, do we need to have some sort of regulation? Do we need to have, as some of these philosophers that we know have established a code of ethics for creators of this type of experience? Is this something that we need now? I mean, as the naysayer, I want to say yes.
For me, it's yes and no. Because it's so early, yes, we want to have a discussion around how we protect people in these environments, and that should be guidelines, I think, rather than hard and fast rules at this point, because the danger could be that you put the people that get nominated to make the guidelines and recommendations aren't the people that necessarily should have got the ability.
I'm sure President Trump will make a very good selection for the head of this department.
I actually did a VR piece. Have you done this? Where you're inside Trump's head? Oh, it was amazing.
Talk about
and
torture.
It was before he started. Yeah, talk about torture.
Very easy.
But what was really good?
It's the AI. Anybody here can make that AI. And
Sad.
Sad.
What you got was you got the external conversation from people coming in, but you also got his internal monologue, which was even more insane than the stuff that comes out of his mouth.
Anyway.
But yeah, the right people need to be there at the right point in time. Right. Quite often what happens is, I mean, you see it in lots of different things where something new comes in, like too harsh rules come in place, and it's not useful. I think, again, it's a discussion to get it going, first of all.
I mean, in terms of overall sense of perspective, we are in a time of crisis in the media. When the Washington Post now talks about organs like itself, and the New York Times has to call them fact-based media, right, to distinguish against the other kinds of media that our U.S. president, watches every day. That's where the crisis is. And have you seen the technologies now for creating fake videos? It's astonishingly good and scary. You can
I'm going to show one. Let's go. Since you set it up, why not? Can we just show a little bit of video that, in case everyone else hasn't seen this?
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or
True.
How about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. Stay woke, bitches.
Charmer.
Okay, it's a little cheap shot, but thought we could use it. So obviously, there are technologies now that are enabling us to really blur the lines between what is fact and fiction. And again, if we're talking about immersive media and things that are even more believable than tweets or newscasts, how do we prevent these tools being used to misinform?
Well, I mean, I think the problem here is that you have to reinvent journalism for the new media landscape and reinvent systems of authority. So this is an old. This was a problem that was recognized pretty early in the advent of the internet, and it's only gotten worse. But the fact that we haven't established strong enough conventions for trust is a problem of media design. And it's a problem of corporate power that, I mean, this is a place to really worry about corporate control. But it's a social problem and it's a problem of media design. But the argument would not be valid. So therefore, we should just shut down the internet because, of course, it is most of all a means of getting accurate information at exponentially greater efficiency than we could before.
That's particularly because it's a visual trick. It's very easy for people to fall into a belief in it and to see how it can be used. I was at a conference where this is about like 12 months ago, 18 months ago maybe, and there were big news broadcasters there there was a panel session, what do we do about fake news? A, as if it was a new thing, and B, that they had the ability to change it. And it's just like, you guys have been doing fake news for decades. It's just all of a sudden been represented in a different way. It's not, yes, he can make a video to look like Obama, but when, the narratives that come through politics and media, society has been lied to on a mass level for a very long time. These are just new ways of doing it. But because it's a very kind of live visual trick right in front of us, we kind of get more nervous about it. But actually, again, it's just a condition of society that's what we do. I'd also say that that kind of thing is also a tool for good. And like we talked about therapy and stuff like that, that kind of, you can put that to so much good use, and that's the stuff that we should get excited about and put examples of that out there rather than the wrong things you can do with it.
I do think it's a little cart before the horse to talk about regulating VR. The biggest problem with VR is like getting it in front of enough people to make a difference, right? Yeah. I wish it was capable of spreading fake news because that would mean it was talking to more than the tens of thousands of people that essentially it talks to at this point. And it's a very tactical thing right now, but you can pretty much say if you're seeing VR at this point, you're seeing it at some kind of festival like Sundance or South by, or in the amazingly stage where they have done it upstairs.
Future storytelling.
Sorry? Yeah, future storytelling, thank you, yes. And you're in a curated environment. People are kind of helping you through the experience, and if you see our Greenland experience, it's two NASA scientists explaining to you why the ice cap is melting so much faster than it should be. It's all about, it's listening to scientists explain that global climate change is a reality. So, there's not enough in it for someone whose primary goal is distorting our body politic to be making VR at this point. So, and frankly, it's not so much it's kicking something when it's down, kicking something when it's just started crawling. I think, I would say the opposite when it comes to, the corporate regulation. The US has done nothing to prevent any of those. And I'm not going to name them because half our work comes from them, so I'm in a tricky situation there. But it's only Europe, right, that has stood up. That's why we have GDPR. That's why there's some limits being put on the otherwise ever-growing hegemony of blah, blah, and blah. You know what I'm saying? So I think, yes, to regulating the corporations. I think, no to regulating VR because it's in such an infant stage, but also regulation doesn't work, right? Otherwise, then we wouldn't have the fake news problem that we have in the mass media. So I don't know how you go down that path.
Quickly, what is there coming down the pike in terms of new technologies that you're super excited about or think hold tremendous promise for us?
I would say that's not the technology, although it would be good to have stable platforms, but I don't see that happening. And I think that's a necessity before things can move forward. But I think that one thing I'm taking away from this event is that there is a a new generation of practitioners, and that strikes me that even though the platforms may go up and down, that there is a momentum to the development of the conventions, because it's the conventions that build the medium. So every time somebody makes something and we see what sucks about it, as well as what's wonderful about it, then the medium moves forward. And I think that that's a very hopeful sign.
Astonishingly, I'm going to disagree with you. Yeah, I don't think we're heading towards any kind of. I think we're past the era of new stable platforms. Did you watch Battlestar Galactica?
Some of it.
Right, they're all on the spaceship, and they all think like they're going to get to Earth, and when they get back to Earth, everything's going to be normal again. But no, it's never going to get there. That's where we are. We're on the spaceship, and we're having to continually reinvent ourselves because we're past the stage of any kind of stable media platform that's going to endure more than, a few years, I think. So there. No, what gives me? Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Go on, come back.
Well, I mean, I think it makes a difference that Unity, that people can build things in Unity and it can run on multiple environments. And I think that is an example of things going the right direction. But I think the headsets and the hand controllers are still pretty clunky. I think
you're going to see a continual evolution of haptics. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get to like, okay, this is VR, like signed, sealed, delivered. I'm your,
And everything that's on the market at the moment is a prototype. None of this is what is intended. And it's kind of, I would say, if you Google VR, you come up with a load of headsets. That's not VR. That's the way of accessing VR in 2018. That's going to be a different image result search, hopefully, in another 5 years, because it will open more beyond the actual headsets.
So what are you excited about?
On a kind of boring level, I guess I need to say I'm excited about a sustainable business model coming into place. But I know we've got a lot of work to do before we get there, and we need to use that time really, really well. It's great that it's going to take time to land. I'm really interested in different forms of capture and rendering, so volumetric capture and volumetric projection, I think are huge. That is like totally the future, particularly when, like for organisations like ours and Sarah's, where you're kind of taking stuff out to a mass audience. That is the future. The future, which it's one of those things where, like, if you just get rid of the technical hurdles that exist in your head, what would you most like to be able to do, if you know what I mean? And it goes back to Princess Leia. Oh, I did want to say, actually, when we were talking about Star Wars this morning, and who did you say you wanted to be? Obi-Wan. I wanted to be Princess Leia. Yeah, I think, when you go past that thing, it's like the magic of Princess Leia hologram in Star Wars. That actually is also the future of where we're trying to get to, on a completely different level. And that's what's exciting for me, is forgetting about all the technical hurdles, because they are just going to go away. It's thinking about, okay, what can we do with our imagination? What can we do with storytelling? And then let's aim for that.
5G and edge computing, those two things together are going to make a massive difference in our capacity. And then we'll be able to start, everyone will be able to start making volumetric VR. That's not so far away.
I'm going to answer my own question, too. So for me, the thing that I'm most excited about is effective computing and the opportunity to have characters that are responsive to my passions and interests. Like, one thing I hate is when stories end and I'm in love with those characters, and then I close the book or the movie's over and that's it. And so the idea that I could have an ongoing story, a story that would respond to how I felt, whether I had a good day or bad day, whether I was tired or excited. Mother, is that what you said? Mother.
There it is again.
Actually, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Like, it's that story Mom read to me, told me out of her head in bed, that had those characters that she would bring back to life every night. And the idea that we could recreate Mom.
Now you don't have
Thank
to
you.
go to that Freud.
Yeah. I think I need a hug from you, though.
Anytime, Joe.
Please, a warm round of applause for our panelists.